Hi there, I'm Scott Telek, author of the Swithen series of Arthurian novels, the only book series that remains completely faithful to retelling the actual Arthurian legend of medieval times. And speaking of the Arthurian legend, in this video what we're going to discuss is how the legend came to develop over the centuries and become the story that's been handed down through history to us today. So one day I thought I'm going to get to the bottom of all this King Arthur stuff and I'm going to read the real story of King Arthur. I soon found Sir Thomas Malory's Morte d'Arthur, but what I discovered is that what's there is far from a cohesive, linear story. A little bit more research revealed that what we call the Arthurian legend is actually a loose compilation of different stories by different authors written at different times for different purposes, and it's all just been loosely patched together. What this means is there is no one definitive story of King Arthur. This is a crucial insight for anyone looking to dive into the Arthurian legend, because not only does it mean there's no definitive story of King Arthur, there's also no right story of King Arthur. There are only more and less popular tellings, and tellings that have endured through time better than some others. All that said, the story came to a definite milestone with the publication of Sir Thomas Malory's Morte d'Arthur in 1485. So we can use that as the definitive endpoint of the medieval development of the story. So now let's take a look at how this legend developed and came down to us through time. Arthur first appears in historical records in two chronicles, although the historical accuracy of these chronicles is far from certain. They are the Historia Britonum, the history of the Britons, and the Annales Cambriae, the Welsh Annals. These were written in the 9th century, but describe events taking place in the 5th and early 6th centuries. These chronicles say that Arthur was a great leader who fought in 12 battles against the invading Saxons, the last being the Battle of Camlan, where he was killed by Mordred. It does not yet say that Mordred was Arthur's son, and it doesn't say that Arthur and Mordred killed each other. At the same time, Arthur appears in several Celtic legends, fighting enemies both human and supernatural. He appears in the tales of the Mabinogion, the poems of Taliesin, the Welsh triads, and several saints' lives. From the early elements of the saga from the 9th century are Arthur, Mordred, Guinevere, and Arthur's 12 battles. What you might notice are no Lancelot, no Camelot, no Excalibur, no Holy Grail, and no Merlin. All of these were elements that were added on to the story later. In 1136, Geoffrey of Monmouth released his History of the Kings of Britain, which follows the development of Britain from the legendary Trojan exile Brutus all the way to the 7th century king Cadwalader. It also includes the story that became the inspiration for Shakespeare's King Lear, but this was written 300 years before Shakespeare. It's largely considered to be complete fiction made up by Geoffrey, but it does supply the first extensive narrative of King Arthur as we've come to know the story today. Geoffrey of Monmouth was hugely influential in introducing elements of the story that would endure over the time. It was he who brought in the character of Merlin, eschewing the origin story of Merlin as a wild man of the woods and embracing his origin as the son of an incubus and a human woman. In Geoffrey's version, Merlin helps Arthur for a while with his early battles and then vanishes from the tale. Geoffrey also introduces the characters of Kay, Bedivere, and Sir Gawain. Geoffrey added the twist that Mordred kidnaps Guinevere and tries to take over Arthur's kingdom, although Mordred is still not yet said to be Arthur's son. Geoffrey added the challenge that Rome makes on Arthur's reign, the battle with the giant of St. Michael's Mount, and the island of Avalon. His work was further developed by Was and Layman. What Geoffrey and his fellows add to the saga are Arthur's predecessors, Vortigern, Pendragon, also known as Aurelius, and Uther, the story of Arthur's birth and his mother, Igraine, Merlin's assistance to Arthur's early reign, Kay, Bedivere, and Sir Gawain, challenge from Rome and the giant of Sir Michael's Mount, Mordred's kidnapping of Guinevere and usurping the throne, and the Round Table, which was added by Wace. So there's still no Lancelot, no Lancelot's affair with Guinevere, no Camelot, and no Holy Grail. Between the years 1170 and 1190, French writer Quechin de Troyes wrote a number of prose romances that proved to be incredibly influential on the development of the Arthurian legend. The most prominent feature is the introduction of the character of Sir Lancelot, and the idea that Sir Lancelot is having an affair with Guinevere, King Arthur's wife. Also in these stories, King Arthur himself starts to get pushed into the background, with his knights taking center stage in the story. The other major element that Quetch de Troyes introduces is the character of Percival, and also the addition of the Holy Grail, although at this point the Grail is only seen and mentioned, there's not yet any quest for it. He also provides the first mention of the town of Camelot, although that's all it is, a mention in passing. What Quetch de Troyes adds to the saga is the character of Sir Lancelot, Lancelot's affair with Guinevere, a serious elevation of the role of chivalry, Percival, the Fisher King, the Holy Grail, although not yet the quest for it, and Camelot. So now we come to the longest and most complete version of the legend, the Vulgate and post-Vulgate cycles, composed between the years 1215 and 1230. This version began with the 6-part Lancelot, a significant expansion on the character invented by Quetch de Troyes. In this version, Lancelot is kidnapped by the Lady of the Lake and raised in her underwater realm along with his cousins Bors and Lionel. This version significantly expounds on Lancelot's psychology and even includes a male love interest for him in Galahad, who was dropped from the story going forward. After the middle Lancelot section was complete, the beginning and ending of the story were added later. The beginning section of the story starts just after Christ's crucifixion and traces the Holy Grail as it makes its way to England. Then we have the story of the birth of Merlin and Merlin's development until he comes to Arthur's side and helps Arthur with his first battles. The ending part includes the first full version of the quest for the Holy Grail. It introduces the character of Galahad and then follows Arthur's decline and eventual death. What happens here, though, is that the story is reworked into an explicitly Christian narrative. Merlin's no longer just the son of an incubus, he's now the son of the Christian devil, created in response to Christ redeeming all the souls in hell. And the Holy Grail is not just an exalted cup now, it is the cup that held the blood of Christ. And now the story culminates in the quest for the Holy Grail, in which the Knights of the Round Table learn that after all that killing and violence, they're not really worthy Christians at all, including Lancelot, who finds out that because of his long infidelity with Guinevere, he's no longer eligible for redemption. The post-Vulgate cycle tries to rewrite the story without Lancelot, but what it adds is the characters of Balin and Balan, and Morgan Le Fay's attempt to steal the throne from Arthur and place her lover Accolon on it, both of which became indelible parts of later tellings. So what the Vulgate and post-Vulgate cycle add to the saga are Lancelot's nephews, Bors and Lionel, that Lancelot was kidnapped and raised by the Lady of the Lake, the character of Sir Galahad, the Holy Grail as a Christian artifact and the quest for the Holy Grail, Merlin's origin as the son of the devil, Arthur's downfall, a result of Lancelot and Guinevere's affair, the characters of Balin and Balan, and Morgan Le Fay's attempt to place Accolon on the throne. Fast forward to 1485, when Sir Thomas Malory is in prison. He undertakes, perhaps to pass the time, to arrange his own selection of the Arthurian legend into one cohesive, semi-cohesive saga, the only one to be written by a single author and short enough to be accessible to most readers. Malory made several changes of his own, which are important to consider as well. Mostly in shortening the story, he left out some key narratives, some of which are mind-bogglingly important, like Lancelot's parentage, or Merlin's origins and how he came to be, both of which throw Arthur's story into an entirely new light. Malory also arranges all the stories into his own order, which implies a sequential narrative they didn't necessarily have. Finally, Malory edited the stories down to their bare bones, to the point where they almost become difficult to follow. Malory's hand can be felt throughout the entire work, and another whole area of study is what he added, omitted, rearranged, or emphasized. This happened to coincide with the development of the printing press, making Le Morte d'Arthur one of the earliest printed books to be available in England. It became a runaway success, and for that reason is considered by many to be the definitive version of the Arthurian legend. Almost all Arthurian works that follow derive in some way from Le Morte d'Arthur. So what Malory added is what came to be known as the definitive shape and sequence of the entire Arthurian saga. Now, I'd be honored to think that my interpretation could advance the Arthurian legend in any way, but now that you have an appreciation for how this story developed over time, you can understand more of what I'm trying to do with my own Arthurian book series, the Swithen. I'm trying to present a fuller adaptation, bringing back some of those stories that Malory dropped, some of which have huge implications for the overall saga. I'm trying to further unify all the disparate stories into one cohesive whole where all the parts work together. I'm trying to develop the characters and add plausible psychologies and character development so that they seem like real human beings and not just blank heroic archetypes. In the legend, we often hear of an event in the character's past, but in my version we actually see that event happen so we can follow the character's development through the story. I'm also trying to make the relationships clear. It adds a whole other layer of meaning when you understand the interconnected relationships between all the characters, especially the family relationships, all of which can be super obscure in the sources. Okay, so there you are. I hope that gives you a better understanding of how the King Arthur narrative was passed down to us through time and how it came to be known in the form that it's in. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like, check out my own book series, The Swithen, the only book series that remains completely faithful to the medieval sources of the Arthurian legend.